So Jutta, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today about all these wonderful issues that you and I get to work with on a daily basis. I'm really excited to talk to you because we've been working together in the same sort of spaces and even together for some time now. And I've not gotten a chance to actually sit down with you and pick your brain about all these really, really critical issues. One of the reasons what came out of this podcast was to kind of challenge the status quo when it comes to our field and our industry, and kind of ask the questions like, can we use universal design in contexts that we've never used it before? And I read recently your Medium article, and I'm going to link it up here in the podcast description. And you were kind of preaching that same tenet that we need to challenge the status quo. And so let's just start off right there. What do you see as the status quo in this field of, well, first of all, do you prefer inclusive design or universal design?
I actually use, and it's wonderful to get this chance to chat with you as well. And that is a question that we're frequently asked. And in fact, when we moved to the institution we're currently at, the OCAD University, which is a design university, everyone was asking us, why are you not using the term universal design? And it isn't because we don't like the term. We didn't want the particular interpretation of what is universal design to be applied to what we were working on, because universal design comes out of architecture and industrial design. And the assumption there is that you create a single design that is going to work for everybody.
Yeah.
That it's coming up with a single door that will work for everybody, or a single manufactured product that will work for everybody. And we developed our practice through the digital, where there's the opportunity to do much more. There, what some people call affordances. There's many more affordances with the digital, where you can create a design that is responsive to the differences, the different needs and the different goals that people have. So we chose to use the term inclusive design, and our interpretation is also somewhat different from Clarkson and others in the UK who established the same practice at the same time, in almost exactly the same year. And they were focusing mostly on a realistic version of universal design that businesses could adopt, and looking at what is the incidence of a particular barrier. And if you, as a business, address this barrier, then how many more customers can you add to your customer base? And we actually took the opposite approach. We said, one of the things we need to do is to look at the very, very margins, the individuals that are at that outer edge, because that's where innovation happens, and that's where you detect the weak signals. And so, So that very, very long response to a simple question. So yes, we use inclusive design. We distinguish it in that we're not trying to find a single solution. In fact, we also have been choosing not to use the term fix or solution, because that seems to give the impression that you can fix this and dismiss it, whereas where the barriers and the issues and challenges that people that are at that margin, or who have the needs that are not addressed by anything else, are feeling are not things that are fixable, or they're too complex. And our context changes, new barriers emerge. People are variable, people's context and life is variable. And so this is something that you need to attend to quite vigilantly.
All right. So it's not even about creating a product in a certain way. It's not even about the process. It's about the way of thinking.
Yes, it's about, and if you are creating a product or and it is about the process, but if you are creating a product or you have a design challenge that you're attempting to address, then what we hope to create is a system with the range of choices that is needed for the range of human differences. And that has a whole bunch of advantages as well, because it means that whatever you're creating is also much more capable of responsively addressing the change within the environment, the change in demands, the unexpected. So yes, it's about
I
the
got you.
process and creating a system.
Yeah, sure. I'm wondering, why did you decide to dedicate your career to this issue?
Oh wow!
I mean, it's really existential to ask that, but like, you're a leader in this field. So was it a conscious act? What, did it just evolve over time?
I think a little bit of both, and uh, it started with a great deal of optimism. um, I and I've told this story before, but I may rethink what the beginning was. But for me, reflecting back on it now, the when I was hooked and I
Mm,
couldn't do anything else was
mm.
back in 79, 80 when personal computers came out.
Okay.
And I had just graduated, so I had the opportunity to work with 12 amazing individuals who were part of an experiment that McMaster University was taking on. They wanted to address what was an educational integration bill.
Mm,
And so my task was to work with them to see what the university would need to do to make it possible for them to attend the university. And serendipitously and synchronously, exactly the same time, the personal computers emerged. And I thought,
mm,
oh
mm,
my gosh, look at here, the opportunity we have for translation devices. We
mm.
can take any form of input and translate it into something, any form of output and translate it in such a way that people can use it. So we started to hack away at these things, and this was the skunkworks era where you could just unplug the keyboard and plug something else into the motherboard, and nothing was yet that proprietary. There were
Okay.
no restrictive APIs, so we were able to play with these things and create text to speech, speech to text, alternative keyboards at whim.
Mm.
And so that's what hooked me.
Okay.
And the other opportunity we had is that it was like I don't know. I way back when in my youth, I owned a Lada, and the Lada came with this toolbox which expected you to change the spark plugs, change the oil. Like the assumption was that there were no garages that maintained your
Yeah.
car. And it was sort of like that at the time as well with the computer. So we had the opportunity to actually engage people who were going to be using the systems in figuring out how we were going to design it. So it was very much a
Yeah.
co-design process. And that early optimism and opportunity as well really stuck with me. That's where I got hooked.
So is that when you first came into contact with this idea of universal design or inclusive design? I mean, not in the 70s, but maybe.
Um, I actually didn't know the terms or the theory at the
Okay.
time. I mean,
Really?
universal design, yes, right? I mean, in
Okay.
architecture.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, I was familiar with the seven principles of universal design, but also I was reluctant to come up with a set of criteria because I was quite aware that the individuals I was working with had constraints which made it difficult
Mm,
to adapt to certain rigid requirements.
mm,
And so I felt right from the beginning that a single set of criteria would be a terrible compromise for people
mm,
who had less degrees of freedom to compromise. And so I've always been resistant in coming up with, everybody kept asking me, what's the 7 principles of inclusive design? There are 7 principles of universal design. And so I was always resistant because I felt it was relative. What works for one person doesn't work for the next person. And how on earth am I going to come up with a set of principles that are criteria that would work for this entire range of people that I'm working with? So that's why I decided upon, after a lot of pressure, on the 3 dimensions, because what I wanted to communicate is that there is this expansive set of dimensions that you need to explore. So hence the 3 dimensions. The first, that people are very different and recognize and consider that difference. And people need to be aware of their own difference, because you're never going to be an expert in everybody's difference. And the only expert is the person with the lived experience of the difference. So they are the ones that need to get the information about what they need and what will address their needs. And then the second, and it has to be in an integrated way. I mean, despite the fact that there's this difference. You can't. The other thing I realized in the digital space is the minute something's adopted, you can't retrofit it. So the other part of universal design practice that I felt was inappropriate for the area that we were working with was this notion that you can retrofit something, because the minute something is adopted in the digital space, it morphs, it spreads. There's no way to get the genie back in the box. So it has to be proactive. The second dimension is the process. We have to have diverse perspectives in the process. This, having come from, my undergraduate was in rehab medicine, and there's this notion that there's the professional with with expertise that is being imparted, that knows the answers, etc. And also in terms of research, this idea that there is a objective researcher and a passive subject that you are researching. That just seems so wrong to me, because we need the perspectives of the people with lived experience. It is so variable. It is so different. And then because of the issue of cost, like everybody kept asking me, well, isn't this going to cost a ton? Look at all of the number of people that you're going to have to include. But there I realized that you cover so much more of the terrain of the issues and the challenges if you are at those edges or margins. You require far fewer people to be able to tell you what's wrong out there than in the middle. You need hundreds and hundreds of people in the sort of complacent, comfortable middle to tell you what is, or to cover any of the range of the terrain that is there. But you only need a few people that are at the margins, because unfortunately it's a bit of a vicious cycle. One barrier begets another, and they are all very entangled. And then the third dimension is we're working in a complex adaptive system, and that is changing in flux. So hence but that has both a positive thing and a negative thing. The positive thing is that we can intervene in we can have small interventions that can have huge ripple effects. Of course, the negative part of that is you can have tiny barriers and they have huge ripple effects. But there's a way of pushing it to the point where there is a virtuous cycle, where a lot of things, the impact of the small successes that you have can be far greater than you originally expected. So if you try to create something that is going to be beneficial to everybody, you find that sweet spot, then it does start a virtuous cycle. But if you don't, then there will be all these friction points that will prevent whatever thing you have, whatever solution or whatever great success story you've created to not survive, because it will meet up with friction against and upon friction. Again, a very long response to it.
This is the
A
perfect
small
response.
question.
Honestly, if I could bottle that last 5 minutes and put that into each one of my students' minds, I think that would change the world. But I want to go into kind of some more of your experiences as a professional in this field. And I want to pick apart this issue of bias. And I'm wondering if you feel like being in this field has helped you personally kind of identify and maybe even eliminate some of your own biases when it comes to other people, working with them, collaborating with them, and things like that.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the I think one of the things that I tell my students the when the class first begins is we're all going to offend and we're all going to be offended. It's how we move on from there. And
Hmm.
they we all, of course, have biases. We all and it's just to be expected. We're coming
Hmm.
from a particular upbringing. We've been taught a particular thing. We we cannot have been exposed to everybody's perspectives. The one thing that I worry about, especially now as we're looking at AI ethics, and AI ethics has become a huge buzz, and this is a
Hmm.
very choppy transition, but this is it's been top of mind for me recently.
Hmm.
Is that and AI has been seen as this amazing transformative power tool, and recently people have understood that AI automates and amplifies. So artificial intelligence automates and amplifies existing biases,
Hmm.
and um, the the problem with the just simply defining it as a human bias is that it doesn't address the fundamental underlying issues that exist. That we see bias as a bias against a particular identity group or a particular group of individuals, but in fact, it goes far, far deeper than that. And so that's the point that I keep trying to make. Wait a second, even if we eliminate the biases that are created by the systems against particular groups of individuals, we're still not getting at the main issue, which is that we have a bias against diversity and complexity.
Hmm.
We are everything we do attempts to or denies diversity and tries to reduce diversity and denies complexity. We Whether it's all of the sort of sacred things that have, or the things that have become sacred, like evidence and research and rigorous research, or the which are things we should defend,
Hmm.
but they are based upon methods that reduce diversity and ignore complexity, and so I think we need to get at that bias, the bias against difference, the bias against the range of diversity that's there. And we, if we look at almost any other field, um, biology, economics, etc., when it isn't about people, we understand the value of
Hmm.
diversity. And we're beginning to understand the value of human diversity. But again, what we've done is we've packaged it into these neat packages, these neat
Hmm.
protected identity groups, and then said, okay, if we can check off that we've addressed the needs of this group, that group, this group,
Hmm.
that group, then we're done. And that's not going to. There's always going to be another group that is thereby marginalized, and especially the people that find themselves falling through the cracks or still stranded at the edges of those protected identity groups. They're going to have the hardest time um,
Hmm.
getting equity or being included.
Yeah, and just knowing that people move through those different identity groups dynamically
Exactly.
throughout their life, I'm wondering, I've been puzzling about this issue of complexity for some time, and that maybe there's some traditions that are associated with engineering, the field of engineering, that are creating some of these challenges. Because the way I see the field of engineering is you take a complex system, you solve for all the parts, and then here's your solution, right? That kind of
Yeah.
necessitates this form of simplification. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that issue as kind of tradition.
Right. Yes, definitely. This is one of the areas that I actually, my doctorate's actually in engineering. So
Of
the
course it
entire
is.
my entire thesis was about taking apart the processes or the assumptions within engineering. So what's the problem with the process and the assumptions of engineering? Well, first of all, it as you say, we seem to characterize every problem as this industrial building project, right? I mean, we and that works for complicated systems. It doesn't work for complex systems, and there
Mm,
needs to be a recognition that a complex system doesn't hold still. There's no stasis. There's no, and we assume stasis. We assume that everything is going to be the same as when we begin the process. So we adopt these linear logic models, which is crazy. The PERT charts and the Gantt charts that are created for projects are completely unrealistic because the situation will change. And so I've been the proponent of nonlinear logic models. We've developed this process called the virtuous tornado, where at each iteration we look to see who is still missing, how is the situation changed, how do we need to stretch our design out further. The idea that you can build one brick upon another is also an issue because, of course, that denies the relationship between the bricks and the interplay between the different parts. And I think
mm,
that, to some extent, is at the core of this idea of the assistive technology industry in digital
mm,
systems, because we're assuming that we can hive off or relegate accessibility to all other devices,
yeah.
that it doesn't need to be integrated into the standard operating systems or the standard applications or the computer itself, that we can create something that will deal with the issues that people with disabilities have. And of course, what happens there is they need to bear the cost. The economies of scale are terrible,
Mm,
and so the cost is much higher. Whoever manufactures it has to make sure that it's interoperable with the entire range of stuff that's
mm,
out there, which is
mm,
impossible because you have a small, medium enterprise company creating an assistive technology, and they are usually not privy to the information that's needed to make it interoperable, and
no.
so it doesn't become
Mm,
interoperable, or it doesn't remain interoperable, and so you have this um, system that doesn't provide access, that costs more, and that costs increasingly more the more systems it needs to interoperate with. And that's an
mm,
engineering idea. Here's the standard design, and then here we have this component or this little category that we've created of where we're going to fix the issues that people with disabilities have. So
yeah.
the engineering assumptions of uh, that are very mechanistic are really not doing us much justice. We
No.
need an organic approach. We need to have a much more agile, responsive, nonlinear approach to
Mm.
the issue.
I'm wondering if you see innovation processes as kind of a counterpoint to that.
Yes and no. I think there's also issues in the innovation space. especially when we're talking about startup culture or entrepreneurial, or the current interpretation of entrepreneurial culture, because it's seen as a very competitive. It's the goals at the moment, especially when you have pitches or design competitions, is to very reach some specific fix, a winning fix, right away, and then to sell it and sell your startup to a large company and get swallowed up, gets millions of dollars and exit, right? The whole idea of competition, that there is a one winning solution, a winner takes all game in innovation, is highly problematic, because that's where the Richard Koch's interpretation of the Pareto rule comes out, the 80-20 rule. Ignore the difficult 20%, because they take up all your time and your money, and so look for the quick win. And that, of course, is highly problematic for people that are at the margins or that are currently excluded. But it's also problematic if what you're trying to produce is an innovation that's going to last, that is dynamically resilient. You will have a quick win, but it'll be a flash in the pan, as I'm using these terms. Okay. But so if you want to innovate in such a way that you will create a lasting, resilient thing, then you are going to have to work with and look at the margins. That's where the greatest innovation happens. And it's also where you detect the weak signals. They're the people that are at those outer edges or at the margins of our lived experience or society are the ones that are the first to feel the potential problems, the cracks in the system. So the innovation or entrepreneurial or startup culture doesn't seem to get that right now. I think we need to change the narrative and look at where's true innovation and where's true indicators of where the dynamic resilience is.
Yeah, and even just developing things like minimum viable products, that's just kind of contradictory to taking that extreme user approach, trying to understand where they are at the margins and building for them, and then capturing a whole bunch of other people in the process.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And it gives those people that are not at the margins the opportunity to change and to grow and to
And empathize. That's the next thing I wanted to get into, this issue of empathy, because I think universal design, inclusive design, it's such a great catalyst for cultivating empathy. It's been a great catalyst for me just to cultivate empathy for others. And I'm wondering if you had that same experience, or how did you see the role of empathy in your life kind of pre-post this experience of...
Yeah, so for whatever reason, empathy has become this lightning rod of debate, and I think we need to, because it's become a trigger word, and there are people. So what do I mean by that? There has been a pushback on the use of the term empathy. And I think in large part, this is because of those empathy exercises where there is the false assumption that by virtue of living a day in a wheelchair or walking through your environment blindfolded, you understand and know the experience of somebody with a disability. But that, of course, is hubris. There's no way to know somebody's experience, and there's no way to know a particular individual's experience. It bundled into that false interpretation of empathy is also this idea that every blind person has the same experience, and it looks like this. So empathy the word empathy, or the notion of empathy, I think, has been misused in the field. And that has led to almost a demonization of anyone that talks about empathy. So I think what we need is some other term that isn't that trigger at the moment. I think
I got you.
the empathy will be rehabilitated at some point, and we can use the term again. But the opening your mind to the possibility that that everybody doesn't have the same experience of the world, and that there are this huge diversity of experiences in the world, and holding in your intention and in the way that you create things, design things, imagine things, this idea that you need to go beyond your own referent, the referent of yourself, your immediate family, your community, the whatever group you're part of, and that you need to be open to imagining completely dissonant and different experiences. Is what, and I'm not sure what we can call the term. I mean, there have been horrible terms like, the pity, of course, is at the extreme of that spectrum of terms, and that is this notion of thinking about somebody else from a power perspective, where sort of reveling in the fact that you are better off than somebody else. That's terrible. That's a very negative part of that spectrum. Sympathy is also, is somewhat problematic because it retains that power relationship. Because
separation there.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm better off than you are, and I can sympathize, this sort of thing. And that breeds this notion of charity, which is a power play. And it creates this untenable power relationship where I have to be have gratitude towards the fact that you have done something of charity towards me. So there's and it's a horrible thing to try to escape from, because there will be this indebtedness for whatever action you've taken. So how do we redefine this space? Because there is something very powerful and very important in whatever we want to call it, since empathy is not the accepted term right now. Let's come up with another term for being recognizing that we're all different, we're all entangled, that my experience is not everybody else's experience, that and so it's the thing that is at the intersection of difference, that truth that is at the intersection of the diversity of perspectives that is out there. So I don't know if maybe you have a way of...
I've heard compassion used a lot lately, that compassion is like the next generation of empathy and trying to behave and think compassionately, but I don't know.
No, I
still
don't know.
use
That has so much, there's
trapping.
Action in that, right? I mean, it captures a piece of it, but not the whole, because it involves what I'm looking for is something that involves, I guess you could say, that those three things that Girl Guides or Boy Scouts have: the head, heart, and hands. So there's a practical component, there's an emotional component, and there's a cognitive component to it. You need all three to really achieve whatever. What I'm looking for is something that encompasses all three, and the lack of hubris as well. The lack of thinking that the notion that you actually understand. I think there is an incompleteness to it. One of the principles that a lot of my design is based upon, especially in education, is this idea of the value of the imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. And in academia, of course, we're always looking for perfection, completeness, and permanence or stasis. But we then deny just in learning, I mean, the imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete are where you actually get people engaged in learning. But in any design, we need to understand that whatever we're doing is not complete. It's never going to be perfect, and it's never going to be permanent either.
No, no. And thankfully so. I think that's the reality. I think we're kind of
Exactly.
trying to deny somehow. Like, it's good that it's incomplete and that it's imperfect and it's not going to be
Right,
stable.
yeah.
That's wonderful. If it were, we'd all still be stuck back into some very old-fashioned ways of thinking and living and all that.
Right.
I want to dig into this diversity issues because you brought up the D word. So I want to talk about it because I found in my experience with this field that the more I've been involved, the more I've kind of been stuck in, the greater the diversity of groups of people that I've gotten the privilege to work with. If I had followed a track of my career that didn't go down this road, I imagine it being very, very much more homogenous, much less diverse. And I'm wondering if you had the same experience, or how do you see that element of it in your work?
Yeah, I frequently tell my students that this field is the best filter for the greatest people. It's yes, and the unfortunate thing is that we have a propensity as humans to try to categorize, to put things into boxes. And even that's how we're dealing with diversity right now, which I think is quite unfortunate. And that doesn't serve the individuals we're attempting to serve either. I fully understand the reason why we're doing it, because the categories are a tool to band together to form a power group that can advocate and that is protective of each other. But the way that we are categorizing, classifying, boxing in specific diversities is also hurting us in all sorts of ways. Going back to the artificial intelligence, the test at the moment for whether an AI system is biased is to compare a bounded identity group with respect to data and the default. And the determination is made that something's biased if there's a huge difference between the treatment of the two. But this doesn't work for someone with a disability because, of course, from a data perspective, people with disabilities, the only common data characteristic is divergence from the norm or from the average, to the point where things are not designed for you and therefore you experience barriers. So how do you capture that from a data perspective? You can't. And so the ways of addressing diversity in AI systems and testing for bias against certain diversities is not going to work. And what I'm worried about is those individuals that don't fit the groupings. And of course, there's an attempt to create groupings within disability groups as well. What we're creating is even greater disparity for people that don't fit the groups, or that are straddling groupings, or that are caught at the margins. And so, yes, I'm exposed to amazing, and diversity is also, it's multivariate, right? I mean, there's it's not just everybody is so diverse. And the further I get from my own experience in building relationships and connection and understanding, the more it's such a wonderful gift to stretch the connections that you have with people. And I love getting to know people who have just a completely different experience and different assumptions, different worldviews than I have. It challenges me. There's often dissonance, and yes, there's much more danger of offending and being offended. But working through that, the reward is just, it enriches life. It helps me to innovate and to think about new possibilities.
I find so much joy in that. It's so it's just reassuring for me to hear that from you as well. And I think that's if there could be one takeaway, I think, from this episode and just from this field in general that would capture the imagination of next generation, it's that issue exactly, being able to connect with people that are so far removed from your own experience that you have joy in that connection. There's so much value in that. I want to be respectful of your time. We have a few more minutes, but I want to challenge you here a little bit and kind of think about what can we do to disrupt is a kind of violent word, but maybe something less violent than disrupt, but just check the expectations of the people who are working in this field and find ways that we can continue to evolve our thinking. One of the things I respect about you most is that you weren't a one-trick pony. You didn't just do one thing and then, okay, that's my claim to fame and I don't have to worry about anything else now. But you continue to evolve and challenge yourself and your history, your own work you've challenged. And I love that. And I'm wondering what you see as the next stage here. How can we continue to challenge our own expectations as advocates and as leaders in this field?
Yeah, and unfortunately, as things reach some stage of success, and to some extent, parts of the communities that I work with, I have reached that level of maturity where it's no longer the wabi-sabi, the impermanent, imperfect, and incomplete. People have this notion that, and I think you're probably talking specifically about the web content accessibility guidelines. The intention originally was very good, but it has become this almost sacred thing that has sprouted an industry that is self-perpetuating, that is the basis of profit and is no longer, has become a hammer that is looking for nails as well. Mm-hmm. So those are all aspects of something that is no longer adequately responsive, adequately cognizant of diversity, complexity, change, variability. And so that's one of the things that I worry about quite a bit. I'm not sure how to address that, how to shock the group that I am part of, the community that I am part of, into stopping for a minute and looking around again and seeing that, in fact, this thing that we're so wedded to, that we have been defending vociferously for so long, because we've been at I think one of the things that's happened is there was so much resistance to the web accessibility movement initially, and so much dismissal, that we're all used to defending and defending and defending. And now at the point where it's become legislation and there is this industry that is carrying it forward, all of the web compliance industry, the web auditing systems, the legislative integration into almost every jurisdiction around the world, we've lost the ability for self-critique, because our role has always been to advocate and to defend it. And so that self-critique is something that is so essential for the survival of the goals that we have. And we are even thinking that what we've created is adequate for a completely new set of technology. The idea that you can apply the web content accessibility guidelines to say, VR and AR, which is a completely different experience. It creates these blinders. And so these blinders are preventing us from understanding that this is a new domain and we need to create a more responsive and appropriate set of ideas about how to provide access to this next area. And the yeah, there's a lot to
there's a lot to unpack there. I see that. I see the expression on your face, and it speaks volumes. Can I just ask one last question? Because I see we're at the hour. Do you feel free to have that sense of self-criticism about your work? I mean, is there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's so essential. And the same, I think the same thing is happening more broadly within the society as well. By virtue of having to defend democracy, we've reduced it to one person, one vote. So the trivial needs of the majority will outweigh the essential needs of the minority. We're not people who are defending democracy are not evolving it, or and the same thing happens within. I mean, everywhere. In terms of researchers, we are so vociferously defending science, evidence, etc., equating quantified evidence as the only truth, and therefore statistical significance is the only indicator of truth, which means that individuals who are not homogenous, where the conditions cannot be isolated, are the ones that are losing out. So we need self-critique in all of the virtuous areas that people are defending. And we definitely, or we won't evolve and we won't adapt. And that means that we won't survive. So I think self-critique is one of the most critical parts of innovation and survival.
I love it. I can't imagine a better way to end the episode. So from the bottom of my heart, Jutta, I cannot thank you enough for the honor to have a chance to have this conversation with you. I'm going to be thinking about the things we talked about for weeks and months ahead. And I've been noting the whole time you've been talking the different ideas that have come out of my brain as we've been discussing these issues. And I just can't wait to share this with the people who care about these issues so that they can extract that same kind of knowledge. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Is there anything, last words you'd like to say?
No, I just want to say thank you for airing these and giving me an opportunity to ramble on about this. This is great. And of course, all of our conversation is impermanent and imperfect and incomplete. And that's it'll be great to get other people to join the conversation as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's the ambition here, is to get people engaged who are not part of our bubble, and especially the next generation, who I think would see not just your history of work, but the evolution of your mindset as inspirational. So thank you.